As we continue our AngusTREK across Australia, part of the World Angus Forum, our coverage brought to you by Rotomix, of course, designed for feeding performance. And we are here in Queensland. We crossed the border last night. Joining us is Stuart Judd, a producer here in the region. And Stuart, where are we exactly? Talk about this historical site that we're on that you actually farm and ranch around.
Yeah, so Glen Gallen station is the name of the place. It was one of the original stations settled back late 1800s, 1880 something or other. When the states separated just after Federation, when Queensland became a state, this was one of the first places settled. And the old woolshed up there, they tell me, is one of the first woolsheds built in Queensland back in the sheep day. It was originally a sheep station. So all of these flats were merino sheep, where the wool would get shorn up here in the sheds and shipped back to England back in the day.
So you mentioned you grew up in the dairy side of things too, but
my family, I'm from a long line of dairy farmers and a disgrace to the family. I'd do anything around a dairy except get in and milk cows. So I'd do the feeding, mix the feeds, do the farming, do any of that. I just don't milk. Don't put milk in my tea, don't put milk in my coffee.
Well, and as we gather here today, you know, we've seen a lot of country from Sydney all the way up, making our way to Brisbane for the World Angus Forum. And I keep mentioning that Rotomix is sponsoring our coverage. And yesterday we're at Rangers Valley Feedlot. A lot of great Rotomixes there as well. And I know you have a great connection with Rod and Kelly and the crew back in the United States. Because those are one of the top feedlot performance equipment tools that folks are using around here, and you have a great connection with Rotomix.
Well, as things went on, we ended up in the custom silage harvesting business through probably forced into it in drought back in the dairy days. I left my job to come home and help on the farm as our crops were failed crops in drought, and then we harvested some neighbours' crops that my father brought in for silage. That ended up growing very quickly, and then we ended up in that business. So that's taken us all over Australia over the last 30 odd years. And on that journey, all the big feed yards that we work for predominantly use Rotomix mixers. And in the early days of the silage industry in Australia, there wasn't a lot of support. In the mid-90s, I made a trip to the US to try and find somebody that knew a bit about the equipment we were running and sourced some parts, and we've been going back ever since. And then on that journey we ended up sourcing parts and things for other customers and feedlot customers. Some of those were some Rotomix parts, and then we got hooked up with Kelly and met Rod over the years, and ended up looking after Rotomix in Australia, because our business everything we do revolves around feeding cattle. So from silage harvesting to supplying the trucks, we've got some trucks on livestock transport now that come from a long-term customer that was retiring, and mainly here in Glen Gallen, as I said earlier, is we produce fodder that ends up at the local feedlots.
And I know it's a little different here in Australia too. There's not a bunch of dealerships either for the products of Rotomix, but that's one thing that I've talked to several folks in the U.S. but also here is maintenance is not quite the issue as in some of the implements that folks use in feeding, and that's what kind of helps with the Rotomix reputation here at home, or back at home and here in Australia as well.
And in the early days of the Rotomix coming into, some of the original customers that Rotomix had were a bit like myself in the silage job. We needed the equipment, so we had to go and get on a plane and go and find that equipment in North America. We learned to be self-sufficient and have to look after ourselves, because we are so far away from a dealer network and support. That has changed a bit considerably to where we are today, but in the early days of Rotomix, you go and get the machine, and then you learn to carry a reasonable inventory of parts on hand, and a lot of the yards still do. All our parts these days are just in town here in Warwick. And as times change, people tend to look for a bit more support these days than those original customers would have. So while we don't have a dealer network, we usually, and once again through my silage years. The guy that's got a problem in that town, well, we usually know an engineering works that can get you out of trouble on Sunday because we've been there with a broken down silage chopper.
So what is your silage made of? I know that was a conversation we had there over at Rangers, is just not a lot of corn, obviously, here. What are these rations looking like, and when are you putting it up? Because I know we have different seasons compared to the states here in the Southern Hemisphere.
We're pretty much just the opposite to you guys. Our corn season is just finishing off now as we come into autumn or your fall. We've still got one crew out that'll finish this week. We finished at Rangers. We actually do the silage at Rangers. We've done that for coming up 20 years, I reckon. So normally they've had not a good season down there. A lot of their corn is dryland corn, so we're relying on the weather. Probably 30% of it's probably irrigated, but the majority of it is dryland. So corn is where everybody would like to be, but Australia's a pretty bloody harsh environment, and we're in the lap of the gods as far as weather goes. So silage rations tend to be a lot more of a sorghum, grain sorghum, forage sorghum cross. It's a lot more forgiving and drought tolerant. So like a failed crop of corn is a failed crop of corn, and there's no coming back from there. Where those sorghum crops, not uncommon for us to harvest those like early in the straight after Christmas. Our summer season usually starts. We could go in and harvest those crops if they're starting to struggle in drought. If they turn around and get a break in the weather, then it's not uncommon to go back and get a second cut of. They'll just regrow again, and we'll be harvesting them 3 to 4 months later.
Yeah.
So the cost of growing corn now is extremely expensive here. The fall armyworm has really given us a lot of grief, and we don't have GM modified crops. We don't have GM corn, so
and that's a government regulation.
That's a
correct?
government regulation. So that's really, I will only plant enough corn this year that I know we will silage.
Yep.
I love growing corn, absolutely love growing corn, but I've worn down to growing that dirty, itchy sorghum because it's much more forgiving with the fall armyworm, and we find if we can get the corn in early and get it, take it for silage, we've sort of, we haven't beaten them, but we've reduced our exposure. So our summer cropping tends to be more grain sorghum here now on Glen Gallen, but across the board on the feedlot rations, ideally made up of corn, but mostly in Queensland especially, it's that grain sorghum, forage sorghum cross, silent grain or a chopper sorghum, brand names, just simply because of drought tolerance and the yield, the dry matter yield we can get off it with limited rainfall.
Yep. Now I know your house is right behind us where
That's
you live,
it,
right?
Yeah. Yeah, my maid's just busy. I think she's probably preparing morning tea.
Now this home has been here for quite some time and kind of went derelict for a while, but the community is surrounded around this 5 acres of the circle site.
So when we were kids, obviously on the main highway through to our next big town as you drive past here, the guy that was the farm manager here when we bought the place 20 years ago tells me that they used to stack hay in the old house and used it for a hay shed. And of course the story around the town when we were all young fellas was the house was haunted, and on a Saturday night the local bloody celebrities would be out here having a party and drinking beer and chasing ghosts.
You, was it?
No, I didn't believe in ghosts. But to their credit, the Heritage Homestead Trust was formed, and many hundreds of $1,000s later, the house has been restored. It hasn't been completely restored. Some of it upstairs has been left in the state it was at, just to give people an idea of where it was to what it's come to today. And they've built the coffee shop and restaurant over there. And the beautiful gardens. They've sort of slowed down a bit now, but come spring there'll be a wedding down there just about every weekend. A lot of weddings and functions they have here. It's good.
So, and I know I don't want to hold you up here, and they're probably going to be snapping the Australian whips to get us back on the buzz here. But what really sets Queensland apart from the other agriculture topographies that we went through traveling up here from Sydney? What And I know there's, what was the joke? Somebody, I think Keeve said yesterday on the bus, and we're going to interview Keeve here, hopefully, about welcome to Queensland, where your money's worth more and the weight's off your shoulder and everyone's better. I'm not doing that justice, but obviously a little bit of rivalry between the states. But what is it like putting up crops and livestock here in this region in particular that you enjoy so much?
Well, the bottom line is the cattle are in Queensland. So if you have a look at a map, with if you can sort of get hold of a cattle map, with as I said there earlier, we've got 4, reasonably small feed, 10,000 headish, close to us here where we supply commodities. But if we go to Toowoomba, the next big town, sort of 3/4 an hour drive from there, there's 1.5 million head of cattle on feed in Australia at the moment. I don't think I'd be exaggerating if I thought between 800 to 1 million of those would be within a 3-hour radius of Toowoomba. So the cattle and the infrastructure, the cattle are all out there. Our trucks work. We've got 4, the packing plants are here. Even the cattle from sort of southern New South Wales, from where you've been over your trip, a lot of those cattle will kill up here. The Cargill Tees, we've got a plant there, JBS. So they're not big numbers compared to being in Dodge City, where you're seeing 6,000 head knocked here and another 6,000 across the street. Yep. Kilcoy, Abattoir, the 4 big packers are up here, and they're probably been up to doing 1,500 a head a day, and that'd only be a guess. I know Kilcoy's around 1,200. I'm not sure what JBS or T's do, and they're up around that 1,000-ish. And then the breeder cattle are in the north. So what traditionally happens is as you go further north into the bigger station country, the cattle get bred in the north. We truck them down here into this Darling Downs hub where the feed yards are, or a lot of the companies that have got stations spread over vast areas, they'll truck their weaners down into some fattening blocks further south onto buffel and buffel grass and that sort of thing up in the central Queensland. And then when they get up to entry weight, they'll truck them down into their yards and down here, and then obviously the feed yards are sort of probably within a 4 to 5 hour radius, maybe a 5 hour truck trip to the packing plants. Yep. So the cattle tend to gravitate from the north on their journey in a couple of hops down here to the feed yards. As I said, it would be at least 800,000 head within that radius of Toowoomba, and then they're close to where they're going to be killed. So that's sort of what's, and then Queensland opens out into a pretty nice farming country as well. So it's the best mix. It's the best of both worlds.
Yeah. Well, again, Judd, it's great to Stuart Judd, excuse me.
Yeah.
I didn't want to call you by your last name first. That might be rude, but Stuart,
there's no such thing as rude in Queensland. as Kelly Whitman from Rotomix will verify, we've tried to offend him with everything we possibly can, but he keeps coming back.
Well, again, Stuart, thanks for stopping by here. Of course, we got several hundred attendees on this AngusTREK tour, making our way to Brisbane for the World Angus Forum. We've seen a lot of country, and it's great just seeing differences in cattle, in feeding as well, and learn more about why corn isn't as prevalent. I didn't realize that GM crops were not grown here, and which I know there's a lot of folks back home that are glad about that. So you guys, our marbling might be a little different than yours over here too. But thanks for really welcoming us to your backyard here.
It's an absolute pleasure, Lane.
But again, Stuart Judd here, producer here in Queensland, and again, his family operation surrounds us here right now. And of course, we're here at the historical site. What's the name of the historical site again?
Glen Gallen Homestead.
Glen Gallen Homestead. There's too many names over here I can't remember, but I couldn't even almost remember Stuart Judd's name there for a second. But again, we're having a great time, great conversations. It truly does feel like we're back at home. Just a few different trees and kangaroos and wallabies jumping about around here. But
not too many bears. Only koala bears. They're up in the tree.
I haven't seen
any
yet.
You won't hit one with the cap.
Yeah, I have not quite seen a koala bear yet. I know we're not supposed to touch them, they said.
Well, they tend to be more on the mountains.
Okay.
They don't get down on the
Well, I didn't bring my hiking boots for this trip.
There you go. Well, that saves the walk.
Yeah. Well, again, Stuart, thanks for joining us here today.
Pleasure.
And again, more of our trek across Australia, our friends at Rotomix, bringing you all of our conversations here on our social media channels, the podcast, the Western Ag Network, Instagram pages, Facebook, and of course, on our TV and radio programs back home in the States. Again, more conversations coming to you from down under here this week. I'm Lane Nordlund. We'll catch you next time.